Welcome to The East Angle, a podcast about the East, broadly defined, exploring international relations, politics, and history. When time allows, we will also delve into world events and our shared passion for football. I'm Ra Mason, and this is my co-host, Sherzod Muminov.
Welcome to another episode of The East Angle.
And today we are particularly happy to welcome a friend and colleague who is with us from Lund University in Sweden. It's Paul O'Shea. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Paul is Senior Lecturer at the Centre for East and Southeast Asian Studies at University of Lund and works on international relations of Japan, the US, and East Asia more broadly, and has written 2 or 3 really standout articles, one of which he will be presenting in a couple of months' time at the Daiwa Foundation. And these are articles that kind of open up a new area, shine a new spotlight on aspects of Japanese foreign policy and Japan's international relations. And there's so much to talk about this morning because we're talking to Paul after 2 massive elections, one in Japan and one in the US. So we'll ask him about that and many other things. But for now, I'm going to hand back to Sherzod.
Yes, it's a great time, I think, to be speaking to Paul because of the tectonic shifts in international politics. The United States election will affect everyone. Obviously, it will affect Japan, and I think some of the things that we will ask Paul about concern that. But let me start with one of our traditional questions, because this is a podcast about the East, about East Asia, with a specific bend on Japan. We are always curious, especially speaking to guests who work on Japan, how they got into Japan in the first place. So I have 2 questions for you, kind of general introductory, somewhat personal questions. First, how did you become interested in Japan? What got you into being interested in Japan? And the second question is, what was your strangest, weirdest, most unusual, however you want to put it, experience in Japan?
Sure. Thank you, Sherzod. Yeah, they're very good questions. And I would say, starting with the first one, why did I get interested in Japan? Total fluke. So I finished a bachelor's degree in sociology, anthropology. Then I did a master's in international relations. And then I said, I have to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And what do I want to do? And I thought, I either want to do a PhD or I want to be a diplomat. That was my thought. So I said, right, you got 3 years before you have to make that decision. I was only 21 or 22. I was quite young. So I said, I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to teach English and use that as a way to travel. And the plan was Spain, Japan, Argentina. So I went to Spain for a year, loved it. Actually didn't want to go to Japan, wanted to stay in Spain, but my girlfriend insisted, no, we said we're going to go to Japan. So we went to Japan, loved it even more, didn't go to Argentina, stayed in Japan, and the rest is history.
I'm amazed how our paths are quite similar.
Yeah?
I kind of somewhat like it's an interesting coincidence. I had this very similar choice in 2009-8 when I could go either to Japan or Lund University.
No way, really?
Yeah, and at that time I realized, it's amazing how one decision changes your life, basically.
Yes, it's so true, yeah.
So, and about the second question?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose there's two really unusual experiences I had. The first was when I was teaching English on the JET program. We went for a weekend trip to Shikoku, a road trip, and we were totally lost on the way back. No idea where we were. We were driving through some valleys, and we stumbled upon what is now like world famous, but at that time no one had heard of, was this village with the dolls.
With the dolls?
You know the village with the dolls? It came to prominence like in 2012 or 2013 because the New York Times did a big article on it. Now it's like all over social media. And so
what kind of dolls? Like Japanese dolls or?
Lifelike dolls. There was a woman in this village who lived with her mother and everybody had left. So she had knitted all of these dolls and she put them. There was a fisherman doll who was leaning over the bridge. There was kid dolls at the bus stop. There was a farmer doll in the field. The whole village, there was like 100 dolls and it was incredibly
spooky. And one person made them?
And one person made them. We stopped and we were like, what is this? Have we walked into like have we gone into another dimension or something when we turned down this valley? And eventually, so we were stopped taking pictures, and then there was only one house that was occupied, and it was like the windows were moving. It was like the X-Files or something. And then eventually
Sounds like a horror movie.
someone came out and we went in, and in my then not super Japanese, we sat down and she explained the whole thing to us. And then 2 years later, it was like a massive news story. This was like, because it was perfect news fodder, Japan, depopulation, loneliness.
Maybe
so yeah.
you can pull up an image and put it on the
Yeah, you'll find loads of really good images. Now it's a tourist attraction. Like now it's somewhere people actually go to see these dolls. So yeah, that was kind of crazy.
Amazing stuff. So I'm wondering with that, especially on the issue of loneliness and Japan, aging society, all these changes. When you look at Japan now and you're thinking about the politics, do you see it as totally transformed? Is something completely different going on? Or do you see it as basically the same country that you knew then, just with different people?
That's a really good and a difficult question. I haven't been to Japan since COVID. So that's one thing I have to put on the table straight away. COVID came, obviously no one could go to Japan. Then I had two children, one after another. So I'm going to Japan next year for the first time since 2018. And that is by far, I was going to Japan every year, twice a year. So I don't have that feeling, that on-the-ground feeling. But when you look at the politics from afar, I don't think anything has changed. It's the same old, same old. Even this election is groundbreaking in the one sense. You read all the media reports. This is a transform. Nothing like this has ever happened in Japan before. And you're like, no, much bigger things happened in 2009 and 1993. But just because nothing much has happened lately, this seems like a bigger event.
Right, and you've written about that extensively, particularly in 2009, when previously you had the LDP in Japan, the ruling party, fall from power. You had the opposition come in. As you say, this time we're not even going to get an opposition government. So do you see the same kind of dynamic playing out that you wrote about then? And maybe you could tell people a little bit about what you think happened and what might happen now. Or do you see, because we've also had an American election and we've got Donald Trump 2.0, is that going to change things dramatically in a way that is equivalent to back in 2009?
I think for the listeners' sake, we need a little bit of context. Sure. So what Ra is mentioning is basically two big developments in the last maybe 20 years of Japanese politics. When the ruling party, Japan is a democracy, it's not like one-party country, but somehow over the past 70 plus years, almost 70 years, like that, 69 years, since 1955, this is my bad maths, one party has been dominant in Japanese political scene, and the two instances in 2009 and more recently this year, LDP couldn't get the majority of votes. So in 2009, Democratic Party of Japan came into power and stayed in power for just over 3 years. And currently there is this kind of a situation which Paul will tell us about, where the LDP couldn't secure a majority. So those, just for the listeners who don't follow Japanese politics, this is just the context of the...
Although we should remind people that although they don't control a majority, they will still be the party of power. So that's even more why I want to ask Paul whether the Trump 2.0 matters or not.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is that in 2009, everybody was pronouncing the death of the LDP. Both in scholarly articles and in the news, it was like, oh, this is the end, everything has changed utterly. The LDP will be out of power for at least 5-10 years. Maybe it'll fall apart, maybe it'll regroup. But we're in this two-party system now where it's going to go back and forth, and the LDP will never be the same. Roll on 3 years, we're back to exactly where we were in 2008, and we have Abe, the longest-serving prime minister. So I'm just very cautious, remembering in 2009 how everybody thought this was a fundamental transformation of Japanese politics forever. And really, all the top professors, I'm not going to name names, but you go look at Social Science Japan Journal, the academic journals, it's really the death of the LDP. That's the narrative, right? And then, the LDP since 2012 has been as successful as any party on the planet.
Yeah. Which is very strange.
Years.
Like 2019, 5 years ago, everybody said the same about Labour. Basically, after the Boris Johnson landslide, Labour is dead and buried. And look at Labour now.
Yeah.
With another landslide. So,
But we didn't have a Donald Trump administration. Does that not count for something in terms of shaping? What is it that Trump, for example, might do to Japan that would change things?
So that was the second part of the question. I'm going to give a very boring answer, which is that I don't think very much. I gave a talk here at this fantastic, I would say beautiful university. I love the campus. It's so nice, and it was so nice yesterday. So many people came to the talk. It was really engaging. But Japan is not in a difficult position compared to other similar countries, right? We are in a difficult position in Europe. Whether you're in the EU or whether you're in the UK, it doesn't matter. We are going to struggle so much with Trump. But Japan has what the US wants, which is the space for the bases. It has strong anti-China sentiment. It has strong pro-contain China. If the United States wants to, and we see from the appointments that Trump is making, the main goal of US foreign policy for the next 4 years will be contain China. So Japan's very happy because that's what Japan wants, and Japan is invaluable to containing
strategically,
China.
you know, the unsinkable aircraft carriers,
it's still
despite
the
the
same.
end of like 30 years on,
Yeah.
since the Cold War ended, is still very important because of China now, not because of the Soviet Union. As
Yeah,
in the Cold
exactly.
War
And
days,
I think that's still the same. And Trump realizes how valuable Japan is, and his new Marco Rubio, all these people, they know the value of Japan. So it's sitting pretty. I don't think it's going to be so affected.
Very interesting observation, especially what you said about Europe, you know, and this kind of made me think about this bigger picture for the so-called, you might want to call them Western, I don't know how. Do you get angry when people call Japan Western?
No.
Okay.
Doesn't bother
I mean,
me.
I'm just doing this like for
Yeah,
the
fair enough.
podcast purposes. Okay, let's say industrial, post-industrial, liberal democracies. And if you look at the top four economies in the world, three of them are in some form of a political crisis. I mean, you just said that Japan is not yet in a crisis, and probably you're quite optimistic what happens to Japan, even if Trump comes. But then if you look at the domestic politics of those nations, I mean, U.S., you know what's happening. We don't need to remind people what's happening in the U.S. with the political upheavals. I mean, every day you have this one of these like interesting appointments by Trump, you know, Matt Gaetz and others. Japan, we did talk about that political kind of uncertainty. Yes, Ra mentioned LDP will probably continue, but a much weakened LDP. And then you look at Germany, which was briefly the third largest economy. I think it's back now to the fourth, but it's very close with Japan in economic terms. And it is also in a political crisis with this so-called traffic light coalition of Olaf Scholz has collapsed because of disagreements between him and one of his partners. And I kind of look at this and think, is this basically the economic problems, the inequalities, the COVID, the rising prices, cost of living, kind of coming back to bite these democracies? Or is this something that is there a different explanation? So, like, within this bigger, larger context, how does Japan fare? Are you still optimistic if you consider the comparison that I just presented?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. I think that I agree with you 100%. It's cost of living crisis, it's inflation. I mean, I don't know how your salaries compare to what they were in 2019, but like, I mean, functionally, I have lost an awful lot of income. You know, I have a job that I'm very happy for, but like our bills, there's nothing left at the end of the month anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the reality that we're all living, and many people are living that much worse than we. So that's what people are voting on.
But
I think that's what people are voting on. So I think that it's the same structural problem in each country, but I think that because of the nature of the domestic politics are so different in the United States versus Japan versus Germany, because Japan, we talk about populism, the LDP covers the center right, and even further to the farther reaches of the right. It covers so much of that space. So you don't have the AFDs, the Alternative for Deutschlands, in Japan making mileage in the same way that you do in Germany, and the same, you know, Trump being able to. I mean, if you think about it, also in 2022 there was a midterm election in the United States. The Democrats, they sweep the boards, right? It's all, you know, the Republicans are dead. There's no future for the party. It has to unhitch itself from Trump and reinvent itself. That was only 2 years ago. It was only 2 years ago.
Long time in politics.
Yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned populism, and this is the thing for me. So people never put Japan in a populist light in any way. There's always this idea that Japan is completely free from or exempt from populism somehow. And yet, as you just mentioned, it is full of right-leaning actors who talk mostly about specific issues and galvanize their support base through that. So what is populism? And why is
In the Japanese context.
well, actually, in the Japanese context, but more broadly, like, what is it that makes Japan not populist and, say, Donald Trump's America populist?
Well, I think it's the LDP's ingenuity and ability to have this. I mean, it was a big tent party from the beginning. That's the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party get together. They cover so much of the political spectrum that there's no space for opposition, and they monopolize power. I mean, that's a short, very simple version of it, but that's a large part of the story. Is just the size of the tent is so big, and they have been very successful at including populist elements in their politics, in their optics. Abe was phenomenal at it.
Right.
Nippon no Torima Dos.
Right.
That's Japan, taking back Japan.
Yeah.
So the LDP, which is the party of power, party of the status quo, the party that has made everything that has happened in Japan for 70 years is because of the LDP. And yet he was able to sell the 2012 election and get back into power saying, we're going to take Japan back from whom? It's
Yeah.
you know,
Right,
and
yeah.
people went with it. Like they were taking it back
themselves, right?
from the LDP, but they managed to make it out that they were taking it back from the leftists and the establishment and they are the establishment. That was genius politics.
I can't escape
But
the
it's
same
populism.
feeling. Feeling is in the US. Like, let's take America back. I mean, obviously make America great again, but like, let's take America back, you know? I remember I went 2013, I went to Japan. It was just on the back of that election in December. And I could see on every, you know, wall, at every turn, on every kind of lamppost, that Nippon wo torimodosu kind of slogan with a smiling Abe. But then let's go back to my question, if I may. Like, obviously, populism, you can blend it in, and you did answer the question about that populism is subsumed into this kind of broad church approach of the LDP. But then, despite all those differences in the domestic politics of these, or in societies of these three countries, ultimately the problem, and which makes people susceptible, if you like, to populism, is economic, isn't it?
I think so.
You do agree that like the underlying causes are the frustration with inflation, and interestingly, Japan, which for large parts of its history actually struggled with deflation, now is facing a very similar thing. So what is going on overall in the world, or maybe is it just happening to these Western liberal democracies that
You can stop right there.
enables
What is
populism?
going on all over the world?
No, but like a more concrete question, the underlying causes, you have agreed that it's just economic. So what is going on in Japan?
Well, I think you can say that it's economic because Japan doesn't have immigration.
Doesn't it?
Compared to Germany, compared to the UK, compared to the other countries that have seen the Brexit, the AfD, Donald Trump, these much more consequential populist moments haven't come to Japan. And I think that's because that's a difference, that Japan has the same inflation struggle that we all have, but Japan doesn't have immigration as a key political hot potato, whatever you want to call it.
Does that make it immune?
I think I mean, for now, I think it does, and I think it has, right? I mean, what has been the populist upswing in the UK come from? It's come from migration.
Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I mean, I arrived here in the UK on Tuesday, and then when just before I was going to bed, I turned on the TV, and there was this BBC Two big documentary tracing migration policy from the early 90s to today, and so I ended up staying up quite late and watching. It was really good. But like, and it's like, God, this has been a serious issue in politics since, Michael Howard was on the screen. We're talking it was Blair and so this migration has been this issue for 20 years, and it's not really been an issue in Japan.
But it will be soon, right? I mean, the LDP has a 5-year plan. It's intending to massively increase immigration. Surely we are going to see a point where Japan does have to deal with all those problems, and then will it not be in the same boat as these big economies that Sherzad is talking about?
Well, I think one of the things that's going to arrive with migration is we're going to see, I think that with the new Trump administration, for example, I mean, the context around migration and the way people understand migration will change. This is my hypothesis right there. Can't say for sure, but if he does implement the let's get 12 million people or however many undocumented migrants he wants to kick out of the country, and they are knocking on doors and pulling people out, there's going to be massive inflation, right? I mean, this is not this is what everyone is saying, because labour costs are going to go sky high because no one's going to pick strawberries for what the illegal immigrants are. So there's going to be massive inflation, and people are going to, I think there'll be a realization, if he does what he's saying he's going to do, and there's no reason to not believe him, there is going to be...
He's never lied before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from who he's appointing, it looks like he's going to do this.
Yeah.
And it was his big key issue, right? So he doesn't do it and he fails, and he the migration ball comes up again at the next election, or he does it, the outcome is catastrophic, and you get maybe a kind of like a post-Brexit feeling of like, oh, what did we do? Was that such a good idea after all?
Add the tariffs that he's promising to introduce.
So much inflation
and then,
is coming.
Of course, who is going to pay in the end? The consumers are going to pay in the end. And do you think they will be happy, even the ones who voted for Trump?
So that brings an interesting point, because we were talking off air about Sweden.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that has been very healthy, and it was very healthy also in Denmark, because I actually live in Copenhagen and I commute across the bridge to Sweden. So 45-minute train journey. So I have a familiar of both countries in the politics, and in both cases, when the far right parties were brought into government, they were undermined because they couldn't do the things that it turned out that, things are more complicated than brown people bad, and so they're popular. In Denmark, they've been totally undermined. The big old, called Danske Folkeparti, it barely exists anymore. The Sweden Democrats are still there, because they're supporting the government. They're not in the government because you can't bring them in yet because they're still too far right-y. But they've lost support too.
Okay, but
and Trump will lose support.
So if I was to play devil's advocate, Trump has also promised that he will end the war in Ukraine. Would that not possibly improve global supply chains and therefore decrease inflation, and some of these pressures might be alleviated?
I mean, I don't think that Russia and Europe relations will return to normal overnight. I don't think that sanctions will all be dropped overnight. I don't think. I mean, maybe Trump will do that. Maybe it's hard to know with Trump, but Europe won't. We'll have a slow, steady rebuilding of the relationship for sure, but I don't think that that's going to be enough to counteract the deportation of your entire workforce, your entire almost underclass workforce, the people who are working for nothing, doing all the worst jobs, the 3K jobs, as they say in Japan.
But you think there will be a slow rebuilding of Europe-Russia relations over the
eventually?
period?
Well, of course, there has to be in the long run.
And that would answer some of the fundamental...
But we're talking 10, 15, 20 years. I mean...
Okay, so we just have to hang on until then.
Well... But I mean, so the inflation I'm talking about is coming in the United States, I think. I don't think it's coming to us. We'll get inflation because of issues in the global economy, and we're going to get overspill inflation from the United States. We're going to get all that, but I don't think we're facing the same inflation crisis that the United States is facing.
Well, Britain might still be in a difficult position. I mean, which is kind of quite sad, because Britain has, the Labour government, despite all that criticism, has kind of managed to even the ship a little bit. The inflation has now, I think the latest figure was 1.7. I don't know if that's the real figure, or maybe I just heard it somewhere or made it up in my mind. But 1.7% inflation is better than perfect, because the perfect rate is 2%. But what I mean Britain might suffer is because Britain isn't now in the EU, and when EU is resisting Trump, I mean, they can act as one unit, and Britain can now be picked off pretty much if, for example, Trump was minded to do that. And I don't know if he's minded to do that. A lot of the issues or a lot of the promises that he's making seem actually quite contradictory. What better example than setting up a DOGE? I'm sure you've seen it, Department of Government Efficiency. and then in the as a token of efficiency, actually have two people run one department, which I don't think is going to last. But overall, it's. I mean, I like your optimism. I have a question which is more pessimistic.
I think it's because I have young children.
I have like not so young, but I also have children. I'm also an optimist, but
okay.
My kids are old enough to be, pessimistic.
Yeah, teenagers. Yeah. So
what's your question for optimism?
Okay, my pessimist question, I think, is, and I'm just generally curious. It's not that I believe that what that's going to happen, but I'm just curious about Paul's stance on this and Paul's kind of predictions. We are talking about the next 4 years because we're talking about Trump, but overall, there's been this gloomy talk in Japan for the last 3 decades, if you like, that Japan is on the way out, that Japan is facing these fundamental challenges. I mean, we don't even have to mention them, but like some of the biggest challenges, obviously the population issue, which will lead to all kinds of other spillover effects, like immigration will have to be increased, because if you want to kind of compensate for the loss in taxpayer numbers, loss in care workers, etc. So my pessimistic question is, has that process of Japan completely, going out of the picture, completely kind of losing it, has that been accelerated? Are we witnessing and looking? Maybe I'm kind of making too much of a fuss about it, but looking at what's going on in Japan, I personally didn't expect Ishiba to fall into this crisis like 2 podcasts ago when we talked about it.
It would have helped if you hadn't fallen asleep in Parliament.
And like it maybe that might be basically the perfect kind of
symbol of what is going on. Yeah. Sleepwalking into oblivion, losing thousands of people every year because of population decline.
But it's I assume I'm thinking, is it even worse than that? Has Japan already basically entered the death spiral? That's the question.
Yeah, that's...
End on a positive note, Paul.
Well, I think the tragedy of the DPJ, the Democratic Party of Japan, from 2009 to 2012, that's the longest period of time that the LDP were out of government. And they failed on foreign policy issues, really. That's where they lost support. But their tragedy is that they were a party who were well positioned to take Japan into a different era. To take Japan out of this, we want to be a tier 1 military strong nation, and move Japan into we want to be a strong society that looks after our old people and that enables families to have children and that searches to improve quality of life for people. That was the kind of party it was, and the tragedy was that they were fine policies, but they failed on foreign policy. Well, I mean, they were undermined on foreign policy, but so I think
Hatoyama.
Yeah,
and his promise.
Yeah. But so what Japan, sitting here in Europe, what Japan needs is, but what is needed politically is a strong centre-left alternative, and there hasn't been that, and there's been this never-ending spiral and deconstruction of parties separating and then re-amalgamating again, and the process is taking so long for a strong centre-left party to emerge, which offers that vision for Japan, because the LDP's vision for Japan is this: we're still strong, we're still great, we're still mighty, and it's not taking the big decisions, and it's not focusing on those key issues that you're talking about, which are the decline of Japan, and they're just what's not elephant in the sand there. What's the animal? The bird that puts its head... Emu? Ostrich.
Got
there in the end.
It's Nigel Pearson's ostrich. So with that, I think we're running out of time. I think it's an excellent answer. And with that ostrich, it's made me think of Nigel Pearson, who is a footballer. We usually end the podcast on a footballing note, but we happen to know that Paul is in fact an excellent, or once upon a time was an excellent Gaelic footballer.
Oh dear.
So I'm wondering, this might be a yes or no answer. Will Gaelic football ever become big in Japan?
No.
Yeah, but I have a question to Paul about football. I mean, off before we started the recording, I failed. I really tried and failed to pin down Paul's Premier League team. And I wonder, like, under the pressure of the mics and under the pressure of the cameras, if I can do a better job. And
Okay.
maybe you can. Yes, I understand you didn't have a team, but you might have been sympathetic. I mean, don't worry if it's Liverpool. I mean, I won't judge you too harshly.
No, but I mean, I came of footballing age in the 90s, so everybody hated United.
Oh,
So
yeah.
everybody hated United. Was it ABU, All But United?
All But
Yeah.
United.
Yeah.
We still
Like,
sing it.
I remember
It's still-
the Bayern Munich final, and we were actually on a school trip. Was that 96 or 97?
99.
Was it 99?
99,
I remember
yeah.
it. So
26th of
we were
May.
on a school trip, and we were out in some hostel, like, 100 kids, and we all watched the game on this TV, and it was like 50-50, the room. And we were just lording it over the United fans. It was so amazing. And you can imagine, like, 14-year-old boys just being assholes to each other.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so wonderful. And then they came back, and then it was just like insane. And the
And then you became a United fan. No, you didn't.
no, I always enjoyed. I kind of lost interest after the Jose Mourinho period was really fun, and the Alex Ferguson and Mourinho and Arsene Wenger. There was so much. There was so much drama, and it was like a soap opera, and it was really fun to watch. And it kind of that when all the money came in with Man City and everything, it just. I mean, okay, the money came in with Chelsea, but like it just got ridiculous after that. So there was a good narrative. United, the bastion of football, right? And the tradition and Alex Ferguson and all this, and then the like nouveau riche coming from with Chelsea and the Russian money and Jose Mourinho being so outspoken. It was a great story. I don't think there's ever been a good story in football since.
So what needs to change? Because I think we probably all agree, we all feel nostalgic about the good old days of football, and maybe sport more generally. What could actually change that would make football and sport more interesting, more competitive, more compelling, rather than so kind of formulaic and commercialised?
Oh, wow. I didn't prepare that question.
I can't believe it.
I mean, I just look. I mean, obviously, football's all about money, but it shouldn't be so obvious that it's just about money. You know, that's the hard thing. How could it's like it used to be. We knew that we were supporting a team, but in a sense, you were supporting a club, and it was a business, but you could also believe it was a club, and it had values and it had community, and. It's
Still
just,
doing Norwich,
It's like
I think,
religion,
isn't it?
you know. It's like secular religion for a lot of people. I mean, people who not necessarily, I mean, who in real life are quite rational beings, somehow turn into like these screaming idiots when they watch football. I mean, I'm one of them. I have to confess. But like, let me ask you another question related to this, but not like a money related, because you did mention that money came in. Premier League especially, you know, is just the richest league in the world, and everybody wants to watch it, and people pay like money to watch it, like around the world. But do you agree with me when I say another type of football came with Pep Guardiola, and now everybody has to emulate Pep Guardiola? And football, don't get me wrong, this is not just a Manchester United fan speaking. I admire him as a great coach who basically redefined the game. But I'm not happy with what I see. You know, okay, let me give you some examples. You just watch football. No long balls. You know, championship teams
Trying to play
are playing.
tiki-taka.
I mean, it's unimaginable 15 years ago that, for example,
West Bromwich Albion
West
would
Bromwich
pass the ball
Albion
out from
or
the back.
Norwich City would try to kind of build from the back.
even Ireland do this sometimes.
You
know?
well,
Even Ireland.
Yeah, but that's not the
They
only
shouldn't,
kind of
because
complaint.
they're not
you know,
able
the
to.
football has become so anemic. Football has become so, you know, it's like, I don't know, like I can't even compare it to another sport. Like it's like watching like pool, you know, like in a way. You can, it's quite predictable. You know what the other team is going to do, you know. That kind of smashing it, that the long balls, the like kicking it out into the stands, you know, some of the more physical like nature of the Premier League, which I really enjoyed. I mean, I think this guy will enjoy more because he does it also on the pitch. Do you agree?
Yes, 100%. I mean,
do you
it
agree
sounds
that football
ridiculous.
has become worse?
But it sounds ridiculous to say I mean, I understand that it sounds ridiculous to say, "Oh, I missed the long ball," you know. but actually, I mean, and how much of that is nostalgia?
Some long balls.
You know, I grew up watching Irish football, not
Okay.
Gaelic football, but I used to go to, there was a team called Shelburne. They were our local team in the Irish Premier League, and the Irish Premier League, the standard is very low because of the UK, right? All the good players would go. They would play in not necessarily the Premier League, but there was there was these professional leagues they could go and play in. So the standard in the Irish leagues was pretty terrible. And it was really long ball, and the pitches were really muddy, and like nobody could hold possession for more than like 30 seconds. And I mean, at the time we thought it was terrible.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's maybe just nostalgia. I look back and go, oh, you know, when it was tough and players were clattering into each other, and that's how we played football then when we went and played in the park. So
Yeah.
I have that, like, it seems foreign. Tiki-taka seems, speaking xenophobic, it's like this foreign style, you know.
It's not even tiki-taka these days. I think tiki-taka was, like, in its time, enjoyable. One final question, if I may, on football. And this is, like, just... It's a very personal question, so please feel free kind of to just swat it away if you don't want to answer it. But one thing I established is, like, I still couldn't establish your team. I suspect it's Liverpool. But I established that you hated United. And looking back, let me just kind of approach this from a player perspective. There was one player who stood for everything I love about football.
I know who you're going to say. Yeah.
There was one player who, like, you know, just like also going back to my previous question, personifies to me what leadership is, what bravery is. And that guy happens to be Irish. And if that guy actually couldn't persuade you to support Manchester United, I'm kind of baffled.
But you know, the thing about United was that they were the team that you loved to hate. So there was a pleasure in hating them. You didn't just hate them. You
Roy
hated.
Keane didn't make them less hated.
But don't
for
forget,
you.
if you're an Irish person, Roy Keane is also a villain. Because in the 2002 World Cup in Japan and Korea, we're talking about,
Saipan.
he walked...
Everybody talks about Saipan.
He walked out. He was the captain, he was the leader, and he got really annoyed at the amateurish setup that they had in Saipan and the training, and he was surely right, but he walked out and left. And Ireland went on to the second round and were like this close to getting to the quarterfinal. And if he had been there, you know, that was one of our best teams ever, and we've never had a good team since. So, like, he screwed us out of a quarter-final.
Well, sad, because it would have been amazing to see Ireland lift the famous Jules Rimet trophy.
Well, I'm not saying that would have happened.
But
South Korea was cheating. We would have gotten South Korea in the quarter-final, and they had been paying referees.
Well,
I remember that, so...
In that case, yeah.
On that
maybe it's lucky that it happened that way. Right, so... we are going to have to walk out of this room at this point, but we'd like to say a huge thank you once again to Paul and to my co-host Sherzod, and thank you to all our listeners.
Yes, thank you also to Ra and the team, Media Suite team, who are helping us put this together. And until the next episode.
Thanks, guys. That was a lot of
Paul.
fun.
This podcast has been produced with support from the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of East Anglia, UEA. The hosts are grateful to the UEA Media Production team. Technical assistance has been kindly provided by the technicians at the UEA Media Suite, who have also engineered and edited this episode. The views expressed in this podcast belong solely to those who express them and do not represent the views of the university or its affiliates.